Hello and welcome to Reproductive Rebel. I am your hostess, Adrienne Irizarry. As an Eastern medicine practitioner that uses holistic approaches to women's care, I tackle the elephant in the room, our collective frustration with the allopathic healthcare system. In this podcast, I give you a new way to look at your body, understand what it is telling you, and care for your reproductive health. Welcome to this journey. I'm so glad you're here. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I am really excited about our guest today. Fitness and health are very important to me for a lot of reasons. And as a weightlifter myself and former competitive martial artist, I always am very intrigued when I find people who are working in the fitness space, but with a mind's eye towards women's health and the fact that we're cyclical beings. So that is our introduction today for our wonderful guest, Rock Hancock, who is the owner of MovNat Madison and creator of Move With Your Cycle program. Thank you so much, Rock, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and excited to talk about all things menstruation.
Yes, absolutely. So I ran across Rock's program at the end of last year. He was offering an event that was completely cycle focused, and I was really excited. And then found out that he was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was in Maine, and I was not going to be able to attend the event in person, and I was so bummed out. But we were able to connect with one another, and I found that he was in the process of releasing this really exciting program called Move With Your Cycle, where it is completely tailored to the fact that women are cyclical beings, and there is movement catered to every facet of a woman's cycle. So, not all guys walk into a gym with this much information about women's health and their cyclical nature. So tell me a little bit about how you got into this work in the first place.
Oh, it's a good story. It's an entertaining story. It started off, I'd say, when I graduated college. I had a degree in exercise science, and after hearing this story on NPR about women ovulating and their pheromone receptors being heightened, I decided, one, because I was poor and was living in DC, I didn't want to buy soap and shampoo. And so, like, okay, let's let that natural musk out into the world and find my biological mate, which was shortly confirmed that it definitely works, because I had a coworker after one day I was working out, and she was like, "You smell different today." And I was like, "It's probably because you're ovulating." And, we were close enough where I didn't get slapped in the face right away. But she's like, "How did you know?" And I was like, "Pheromones, right? Like you're clearly looking for that mate. And if I were to stink, biologically, science says we're not supposed to mate because I'm there's an aversion there." And, fast forward, a couple of years into the future, I started sharing an office when I was doing some health coaching and corporate wellness consulting. I shared an office with ladies, and we inevitably talked about, we had like these chocolate salted caramels from like Trader Joe's. And like we were the wellness office. So like we had these things, and like every once in a while, women would come in here like, it's just that time. I need a chocolate. You guys have the best. And so I started to like get in on the joke, so to say. But then I was like curious because right around that same time, my wife and I were thinking about having a kid. And so we were talking about like, fertility awareness method and like, just all the stuff, right? Like the tacky, like where's her cervical fluid or whatever, right? Like, is it
Mm-hmm.
long and sticky? Like, okay, we're ready to go. So I was just nerding out into all that while also being a health coach and having these conversations and just kind of thinking. And I would acknowledge that like my male brain wanting to fix stuff
Mm-hmm.
saw like an issue and hearing women like, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing, like high intensity this, high intensity that, and they were just like struggling, right? So I started to like dig into all that stuff a little bit deeper. And my wife was working for this software company here in the Midwest. And it was crazy. She was an implementer, so she was always traveling, and we were trying to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So we started to think about how to keep her healthy and well fed while she was traveling. And so that was like my first like experiment. Like, could we keep her healthy? Like, find all these good nutritious foods, keep her active, to like so she wouldn't get sick. So all this other stuff. And training differently, moving differently, and really trying to like optimize our ability to conceive because we saw each other in some months like 1 week every month. So like if that was our window, that was our window.
Right.
And she stayed really healthy, and we noticed that she had less PMS
Mm-hmm.
when everything was operating. So like no cramping, no moodiness, no headache, nothing. And when diet and exercise and stress management, when all that was dialed in, no PMS, like
Yeah.
none.
Isn't that
And she's like,
amazing?
it is amazing. And like I'm sitting here like, wait, what? Like you don't have to have PMS? Like that's not a thing. And like started asking other women, like, do you have PMS? Like, oh, let me tell you about PMS.
Yeah.
And so then, I started to just again dig into stuff, see what's out there. And most of my clientele has always been women. And so I'm like, there's gotta be information. And there's not a lot of information out there.
It's true.
Um, and so what little there was, I started to just kind of dig deeper and like, why is the high intensity stuff not working? Why are women, when they engage in what's supposed to work, intermittent fasting, high intensity interval training, why are they seeing negative health consequences like reversal in weight loss or
Mm-hmm.
fat loss, we should say, um, losing their periods, if or even just being aware of their cycle, right? Because that's like a whole nother thing. I learned most girls are getting thrown on birth control to help with acne or irregularity, but like, have you had a year's worth of periods? Do we know it's irregular or not? And so just
Mm-hmm.
unpacking all this, right? Just listening and learning, and then decided to like, okay, let's create a program. I'm a big fan of natural movement. I opened up a MovNat facility, and I just felt it was in its methodology very applicable to what I learned was cyclical being. So, like, if menses equates to winter, that's a time to rest and restore. And then, really framing this strength and conditioning program because I had that background of like, what does a season look like for an athlete? What is an off season? And then this beautiful natural thing that gives you 4 distinct weeks, essentially, or 4 distinct phases, and you're like, oh, all you have to do is program that asterisk. Everyone's a little different. And it all just kind of made sense. And I started like, giving it to a few clients here and there to try out. And again, once the nutrition was dialed in, sleep and recovery, stress management, everyone started to notice less and less PMS. And that if they had a symptom or a different, like their period was a little bit different, they're like, oh, what's off? Am I training too heavy? And we were able to like test and learn. And so that's kind of the story of how this came to be. And I was like, okay, this needs to be shared with more people, which was a little hard when I first debuted it in this like Facebook group I'm in. I got a lot of like, yay. But then there was also like, what are you doing here? Right. And I'm like, I'm just trying to help my clients.
Yeah.
And then everyone's like, what about perimenopause? What about menopause? And I'm like, I understand those are populations. I
Right.
do. But like
Right.
my population I work with right now is menstruating women. And so like I'm trying to figure out how to best serve them. So yeah, that's kind of the long of it all.
Well, and you said so many great things in there. And this is exact. So, everybody listening, can you tell why I wanted to have him on the show? So, there you hit so many awesome points in all of that. That if you manage stress and you get good quality food, because I remember when we had spoken before, you were talking about the fact that you guys had dove into the work of Weston A. Price and you were
Mhm.
looking at, you know, the quality foods in the diet, and when you have quality food and stress management and movement, that PMS is a non-issue. This
Mhm.
is something that really challenges the cultural narrative because we are kind of indoctrinated into this understanding that you have a period, you have PMS. Like they are
Yeah.
just one in the same, everybody has it and it's normalized. And instead of
Mhm.
looking at it as a vital sign and going, oh, hey, there's something off in my body, something isn't
Mhm.
working quite right, I
Mhm.
need to get some help.
Well, and that's what, like, when I came across, like, I think it's like over the counter, it's like not over the counter, but like the whatever generic name or whatever, it's like seasonal, like you only have your period like once every 3 months.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do you, how does that work? First of all, and is that safe? Is that like,
Hmm.
and now we're seeing all this osteoporosis stuff,
Yeah.
like early users of oral contraceptives, like in critical bone density years of building bone density, they were on oral contraceptives, and we're learning now that it prevents the development of bone density. And so there's a whole nother, that's like a whole nother podcast, but um
Yeah. I could talk for a whole day
yeah,
about
yeah.
how, hormonal birth control interrupts a healthy hormone cycle in the body. And long-term use, it leads to things like osteoporosis. It creates and opens the door for mood disorders. You were talking
Yeah.
about young girls being put on the period for, well, what is an irregular period?
Yeah.
We even in Western way of looking at periods, we have a very large window in terms
Mhm.
of what they consider a normal range.
Mhm.
My range when I work with clients is a lot smaller. It's 28 to 30 days. You can have a little bit of outlie on either side, but generally if you get too far afield of that, like you're stepping into the territory of the body waving a flag going, hey girl, there's something that's not going on right here.
Yeah.
And using it as a vital sign like you said to figure out
Mhm.
what it is that needs to be brought back into better harmony.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like getting my strength coach certification right after college and like studying this in school. Like, we talked about the female athlete triad. Like, if you've got too low of body fat, early onset menopause, early osteoporosis. And now we're seeing like CrossFit athletes. Like, I wish someone would have told me I might now be infertile because I didn't have a period for 3 years because I was competing at a high level. And I
Yeah.
think that's a whole nother conversation we need to have, but we get caught up in what is fitness and not what is health. And
Yes.
I very much got out of the fitness scene because most people just need to be healthy, which requires physical activity, stress management, all these things. But when we focus on fitness and competitiveness, we sacrifice our health.
Hmm.
And if that's, as long as you're being given all the information and make an informed decision of what you want to do with your life, that's okay. But are you getting all the information? And I don't think, and I'm very cynical with my own industry, I don't think we give people the best information and let them make the decision for themselves. I think for the most part, fitness badgers people into, well, you have to work out. If you don't care about yourself, you don't care about your family, all these other things. And we're like not meeting people where they are. But that's again, yeah.
No, I agree with that completely. And that's, again, one of the big reasons I wanted to have this conversation because, I deal with a lot of people who come into my practice and they go, oh, well, I'm having these period issues. My cycles are super short. They seem to be getting shorter and shorter. And then as we start talking about diet and lifestyle, they're working in a super high stress corporate job and they're on keto. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to knock keto, like for those that decide to adopt that as their eating plan. However, when you do have carbohydrates, it's really important to get certain types of carbohydrates in your diet.
Mhm.
So from a Chinese medicine standpoint, please eat a sweet potato and maybe some squash. Like, look at your
Yeah.
orange vegetables. And like, I have some clients I've had to make a deal with because they're
Yeah.
so firm in their conviction in terms of their fitness journey and losing weight and all of these things, that the idea of a sweet potato puts them into cardiac arrest because it's a really starchy carb. But they add sweet potato in the luteal phase of their diet, and all of a sudden they get 3 additional days in their cycle, and they're like, wow, what is this magic? And it's like, well, your body needs carbohydrates, but we're not
Yeah.
talking like empty carbs. We're talking and sugar and garbage like that. We're looking at very specific nutritional needs that the body has in real whole food. So please look at your orange vegetables.
And it's so interesting because I love seeing the things on social media that go like what an athlete eats versus like what we eat. And it's like energy bars, protein bars. And then you look at these athletes who are eating like 3,000 to 5,000 calories a day. And it's just food. But
Mhm.
like to look that way and perform that way, you have to eat and you have to
Yeah.
eat if like, and then yeah, food is a whole it's a whole nother thing. And again, like, what are we trying to accomplish and nourishing our bodies? And I was guilty of a lot of this like in my early life, and it set me up to have a lot of hormone and weight loss issues myself. Like I had to be a winner in high school
Mhm.
if I wanted, like I wrestled, and if I wanted to win, I had to stay hungry. So that meant not eating, like literally not eating to
Yeah.
be quote unquote hungry enough to want to win. And then that led for me wrestling at like 140 pounds. And then when I went off to college, I ended up getting up to like 300 pounds
Mhm.
because like it was just so disordered. And now finding that balance and like what does nourishment look like first?
Yeah.
And we have to start there with that foundation of what is nourishment and see what that does for us. And so many people are looking for that quick fix without doing the really hard, boring work.
Yeah, it's
um,
true. Well, and men have these kinds of unattainable, unhealthy fitness expectations as well,
mm,
right? I read this interview. There were several actors in it, and they were talking about some of the superhero roles that they had to play and the
yeah.
workouts that they were doing, but that they were literally dehydrated so that
Mhm.
they had that chiseled look for the
Yeah.
camera. And they were like, I don't know how many more of those roles I want to take because I felt so awful while I was doing it. So,
Mhm.
from a visual standpoint, and I mean, women have bared the brunt of some of that visual piece for a very long time.
Definitely.
I just think back to the 90s and that whole very, rail thin kind of ideal body frame. And now we have a little more of a curvy ideal in
Mhm.
terms of the ideal body frame, which
Yeah.
as a curvy woman, I'm grateful for. But, I think that part of this conversation has to be, like you said, about real nourishment and
Mhm.
real food and meaningful movement,
Mhm.
because our health is wealth, and without it
Mhm.
we don't have anything, you know
Yeah. Yeah. No, my LLC is technically called Hippocratic Health and Fitness, and that's because I came across this quote from Hippocrates, and it said, "If we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little, not too much, we will have found the safest way to health." And I thought that was beautiful,
I love
right? Like,
that.
oh yeah, we it's just, what is that balance, right? Like it is good, but not enough of it is bad, and too much of it is also bad.
Hmm.
And and kind of, I'll say in Western society, it's either all or nothing, and we don't want to do that. It's hard to find that middle ground, and
It
it's
really
mostly
is.
really it's and there's a lot of cultural stuff there. Like back to your comment on carbs in traditional Chinese medicine, I've worked with people with different ethnic backgrounds who are like, why can't I have white rice? My people have been eating white rice forever. And now I'm being told by a dietitian that my food is evil and bad. And
Yeah.
we've been eating white rice for millennia.
Yeah.
And that's, and that's a whole nother thing to unpack. But it happens here. And there's, yeah. But yeah, it needs to be about nourishment first and the individual. Like what, like, especially as we're talking cycles, the whole idea of this program is for women to track how they feel. What are their symptoms? What are their strength gains? What are their performance gains? Um, and do they notice anything while they're training? And the program repeats for like 3 months. So you see the same workouts every menstrual phase, every follicular phase, every luteal phase, ovulation phase, luteal phase, sorry. And you just repeat those same things for 3 months, and that gives you a quarter of the year. And you have 3 months of data, and you can look back and like, oh, this is what was working, this wasn't working, and
Mhm.
this is how I felt. And then we can really start to use that framework because that's very much what it is. It's a framework. It's not a prescription. Like how we can now think about movement, recovery, nutrition, etc., in our lives and how to move and live with our cycles. So,
Absolutely. So, one thing I wanted to ask you, because, part
mhm,
of the reason we have this whole go hard or go home kind of mentality, and I'm always advocating for balance with my clients. We're we're not always in spring and summer energy. We do
mhm,
need to have this rest and digest period, and your
mhm,
monthly cycle gives you all of that. But there's this misnomer in our culture that if you're not training at that level all the time, or
mhm.
for women, training like a male,
Yeah,
that you're not going to have the kinds of performance gains, and you're going to get bulky and that
yeah.
type of thing. So, what are you seeing in terms of results with your clients when they move in a cyclical way?
I would definitely say when they fully embrace it and do the work, it takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but we're seeing some pretty cool improvements in physical capability. The occasional body composition change, but that's more of a byproduct, right? Like the intention is like, I want to feel good in my body. How can I start to do that? And then some of these improve, like change in body composition, change in experiencing PMS symptoms, those all start to become a thing. And I would say those are the biggest ones. And it's surprisingly because the effort is less, right?
Mhm.
They're like, this, I feel like I'm spending less time in the gym, less time being active, but getting stronger, feeling better,
Mhm.
and feeling restored. I saw this really wonderful quote. It's like, nothing in nature blooms all year.
Yes.
Um, and so, with this program, so we have like four basic phases or four tenets, if you will. We have like the menstrual phase, the follicular phase, ovulation, and then luteal, right? And so each one is roughly 7 days. And so, we're getting towards that like 28-day cycle and a handful of workouts each week. And so, I remember doing some of my postpartum corrective exercise training. They said some of the greatest resets in a woman's life are her period,
Yep.
menopause, and postpartum, right? Like those are
Yes.
just these natural resets in a woman's life. And so like each time you have your cycle, your menstruation, like right, like you get to reset, right?
Mhm.
So like that's where I started. And so MovNat, a lot of our programming, we talk about restorative movement and starting from the ground up. And it looks very much like motor development of like little kids. It's rolling around on the ground, it's crawling, it's standing up. And then once we've stood up, we earn the right to then do more complex skills. So during menstruation, like our programming is very much deep breath work, gentle walking, ground movement, and just really trying to embody the movement and think about, how do I feel? What do I need? What is nourishing and restorative? And it's super chill, right? Like we're not asking you to do anything, we're giving you permission to do less.
Mhm.
And the beauty of it is, if you took this framework, it doesn't have to be like MovNat, it doesn't have to be our natural movement stuff. It could be yoga, right? It can just be going sitting in the woods listening to nature and not doing a damn thing, right?
Hmm.
And like, that's what do you need? Your body's literally shedding pieces of itself. Like, there are some people out there in this menstrual training world who would say that's when testosterone is the highest, and that's when women should be crushing PRs. But I'm sorry, if the body's actively doing something where it's healing itself and losing parts of itself, that's not a time to be chasing PRs. That's a time to, again, like, I know we equate that to winter. Nothing's blooming in winter. Everything slows down.
Hmm.
And it's funny you mentioned, like, the culture of performance. If you look at professional athletes, the goal right now is who can recover faster and more often. Because the more recovery we get, the harder we could train when it's time to train. And so, there's that disconnect between the high elite sports performance world and the general population where they're trying to recover more and more. Because the more they can recover, the more they can train. And we lose sight of that here because we're focused on like, oh, I need to train like an athlete. Yeah, so rest, right? Go get a massage. And the women who have done this have really like, a lot of them are also wearing it's really cool. The ones who have a like a Whoop band or measure their heart rate variability,
Hmm.
their recovery scores are getting significantly better and better. And their ability to recover in like high stress situations is phenomenal. Like if the kids are just being like super extra one day and that might push them from like green to yellow to red,
Yeah.
like that stuff doesn't bother them anymore. They bounce back, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
If they decide to have like a glass of wine, they're not wrecked for like a couple days. Like they're optimal. And when we're optimizing our wellness, then we can like be a little more resilient. So,
And now for a quick break and a word from our sponsor.
but back to like the framework, right? Sorry.
No,
um,
I love this. This is great.
so after winter comes spring, and so for us that's a time when there's still some instability. A lot of women see like so that's where we talk about mindful strength training, right? And real strength training. Like I'm a meathead, and so like 5 reps is the cap, right? Because after 5 reps, I drift away. I can't think like, did I do 7? Did I do 10? I don't know. Um, but really focusing on that mindful strength, right? So like if I have to lift something up that's heavy, I need to think about that. I can't just passively do that, right? I need to think, is my core stabilized? Am I holding on to this? Is my shoulder stable, right? And then execute the movement. And if I can do 5 really well, well, then I get to go heavier and
Mhm.
heavier. And so really the goal here is to prepare the body to do higher intensity movements, right? So spring is all about growing and things reblooming. And so let's build foundational strength here. Because when it comes summertime in ovulation, right,
Mhm.
it's time to go hard,
Yeah.
right? And now we get to do the quote unquote fun stuff. So taking the time to build a resiliently strong body. In the MovNat world, we have like so menses is kind of like the roots of the tree. We're like
Mhm.
nourishing all that. And then strength and gait, so running, walking. And then like our skills are like throwing and catching. Those happen in the trunk of the tree.
Mhm.
And then we get into the branches of highly skilled movements. And so as we kind of move from spring to summer, if you want to run, do a marathon, do a hit class, ovulation, those few days in and around before and after, right? That's when we get to do the hard stuff, the heavy stuff, the like crazy stuff, because that's when you're primed. I mean,
Yeah.
if you just like, like I think about some of the funny stuff I've read in and around ovulation, like, looking for a mate, like actively like hunting, right? So you're you're like
It's
you're
true.
primed, right? You're primed. And like it's funny, like my wife she won't mind me sharing this, but I'm always like when I walk across her in like the house, like I definitely, now that we've both like stopped using scents and are getting a little more weird in our lives, like I'm like, you're ovulating, aren't you? And I just know because I feel that energy, and I'm like, should we send the kids out, right, kind of thing. um, but it's just so funny when you allow yourself to get into those natural rhythms,
Yeah.
like you just know. And so the energy in the house is always greater. And then, like the women I've worked with, that's where they've really seen their gains. Like they hit those PRs in ovulation and they feel good, they feel ready. I
Yeah.
remember the conversation you and I had last time. That's when you took your fights,
Yeah,
when you were doing your martial arts stuff. Like you
absolutely.
figured out and you were crushing it, right?
Yeah,
Like fights are easy.
the ones that I won, and I won pretty effortlessly, were the ones that I took during ovulation. I had a couple that got rescheduled and they were just a little bit closer to my period, or they were just after my period. And it was like, what am I doing? My breathing was labored. Everything felt like I had to work twice as hard, more in the early follicular phase than in the
Mhm.
luteal phase. But it was like, oh, good grief. Like, come on, girlfriend, you can do this. But
Yeah.
like during ovulation, it was like, yeah, bring it on. Like, this is great. And it's where I've had my weightlifting personal records too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, and again, it's kind of embracing that and letting your cyclical self be your cyclical self. So now, okay, that's summer, and now we get into fall. And so for our program, that's when we start to focus on the complex skills, right? So we still have a fair amount, but this is where, I've had some struggle with open practice and skill development, right? But like the luteal phase really lends itself to that. Like, where am I right now? And what does it mean for me to advance in this skill, to improve this? And it's taking the time. What is the work I need to do to really make the effort to see improvement and like being able to stand back? Okay, like, with some of our stuff, like we have like getting above a bar or up onto a tree branch. So it's called a swing up. Um, and like, what are those progressions? And just working through those progressions, no sets, no reps, just like, here's 15 minutes, just explore that skill. And it doesn't even have to be, natural movement. Like, what is something that like is actively engaging that's a little bit harder, right? Maybe like you're learning something new, but like giving yourself the time and space to work through that. So you get to be, active, kind of similar to the follicular and the strength phase, but there's just not the need for the intensity, right?
Mhm.
And so, um, as I look at like the perimenopause and the menopause world, that's kind of like the bread and butter of like, we take this framework, we basically just remove ovulatory phase out, right?
Mhm.
And we focus on like, the restoration aspect of the menstrual phase and the strength building of the follicular phase and that skill building of the luteal phase, because the volume and the intensity is not needed anymore,
Mhm.
right? But you're still a physically active, capable person. So how do we nurture that?
Mhm.
Right. And then it gets into like the cool thing is like sarcopenia and osteoporosis are big concerns,
Yeah.
right? And so the strength training there and even the strength needed to do skill work, those really help to offset those higher risk factors of, again, sarcopenia, which is muscle loss and muscle wasting, and then osteoporosis, osteopenia. So like it, again, like that's kind of, and then you end up back in winter and menstrual cycle, so menses. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And this is the kind of energetic shift throughout the month that I talk with my clients about, and learning how to live in a cyclical way. But one thing that comes up over and over and over again is, well, but I'm exercising. What do you mean I have to change the way that I'm moving through? I want to lose weight. And
Mhm.
so, I do talk about weightlifting. I weightlift during the winter time, but
Mhm.
I am mindful about it because the winter is the
Mhm.
season of the kidneys, just like the roots
Mhm.
of the tree that you were talking about.
Mhm.
It's the season of the kidneys. And so I personally, and not all Eastern practitioners agree with me, but I believe that that muscle tug on bone, which is
Mhm.
a kidney thing, is very
Mhm.
important. And I think that as long as it's done, and during the winter, I'm not trying to set personal records. I am just lifting weight
Mhm.
to keep myself strong,
Mhm.
but I'm not trying to hit any goals or anything. I mean, really extreme ones anyway. But that it is part of that restoration period that I
Mhm.
get during the season of winter, not the
Mhm.
winter in my cycle.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
because there's like that outside your window concern, as well as the seasons in the
Mhm.
body concern and how they
Mhm.
interplay with one another also.
Yeah, and I've talked a little bit about that with clients here and there, both men and women, and how our function, our fitness, our goals can change with the seasons, right? Like I'm a big fan of, like, kind of like you, like, let's just do some strength work in the winter, like do the heavy work, right? And like sometimes for me, that's just like pulling my kids in a sled, like
Yeah.
up and down the block, right? Like just, I think like Rocky when he went to Russia and was getting ready to
Yes.
fight, like he's like in a barn, like splitting wood, running up mountains, like, but again, like what are the things we saw historically? People had to work a little bit harder for food, so we shouldn't be idle, right? So we have to
Mhm.
work a level of, but not to the point where we can't get to spring. And like summer, like we should be outside more. What are all the fun outdoor energetic activities? Like we should be prepping our body to handle all the adventures we want to have in the summer, right? And then
Absolutely.
within that, like, I think, I always try to tell people, think about Olympic athletes. They're training for one event to be awesome at that event, the best they can ever be 4 years from now, right? So they
Mhm.
spend 4 years between Olympics, right? And each year has, those are those like microcycles. And then each month, and it's the same thing, right? So like we have to have that mentality of like, it can't be a quick fix and we have to give it time,
Mhm.
right? Because nothing in nature rushes and it all accomplishes what it needs to, right? And we just have
Absolutely.
to do that. And we just have to acknowledge we are natural beings, cyclical. Differences between the masculine and the feminine with that. Like men technically have a 24-hour cycle,
Yep.
um, which is just like, I laugh at, because like I would say men are often more hormonal, quote, right, and moody
Yeah.
than women ever are, but that's because we're going through like uh, in one, you all kind of seeing those hormonal shifts in a month. We go through that every single day,
Hey. Yeah.
right? Which is cool. So heads up, if you want to talk to a man in a collaborative way when he's more pliable, we'll say, wait till the end of the day when his testosterone levels are at their lowest,
Yeah.
um, because then they're more receptive to collaboration, persuasion, all of that. So
Ooh,
we'll put
that's a
that out
good tip.
there. Right.
And now for a quick break and a word from our sponsor. Moon Essence is excited to bring you a new resource, the Moon Essence app. Moon Essence is a one-of-a-kind resource providing women a holistic way to support their reproductive health and wellness. Feel in the driver's seat of your own health with evidence-based interventions proven to decrease symptoms experienced with your cycle each month, increase your fertility, and ease life transitions for women in every phase of life. Empowering women's bodies with education about their health journey is the heart of our work. Head over to the Apple App Store or Google Play and download this free educational resource today.
I love that. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about the focus of the program being more on a health perspective. How do you talk to those people who walk in the door and go, but I want to lose weight? And the reason I'm saying
Yeah.
that is I
Mhm.
have clients that that's their first question. Am I going to lose weight on this quote unquote diet? And I'm using
Mhm.
air quotes for the reason that I am not offering people a diet. I am
Right.
offering them a new lens with which to look at
Mhm.
food and their relationship with food. So, really, is
Mhm.
more of a lifestyle shift.
Mhm.
But I know that when you're in that perimenopausal period and you're in the menopausal period, as your
Yeah.
hormones are shifting through menopause, sometimes you get a little softer around the
Mhm.
midsection. And many
Mhm.
of my clients who have naturally been a little more lean, when they start getting that softness, they get stressed out.
Mhm.
So, how do you handle that conversation?
Yeah, and weight is always the question. And what people really mean
Mhm.
is body fat, body composition,
Mhm.
right? Um, and if the emphasis is always that, we're never going to see that change, right? If that's the goal, we're not going to meet that. But if we focus on, again, nourishing the body, there will probably be some changes in body composition, right? Um, and, I would say one of the things that I have seen not work successfully for women is the higher intensity cardio stuff,
Yep.
right? Um, and it often causes a lot of reversal in weight loss, right? They end up gaining more weight, but then still feeling like there's no muscle tone. They're just like losing muscle mass, if you will, because that usually comes with some poor dieting and stuff like that as well. Um, and that the strength training is key, and especially in that perimenopause, menopausal group. Like if you Google like bodybuilding grandmas right now, you will see a ton of jacked women in their 60s and their 70s
Mm-hmm.
with like looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger without the steroids. Because that's the other thing, right? Like there's that the fear of getting too bulky.
Yes.
Women, I would say, there are some higher producing women who have higher levels of testosterone. Those are outliers, but for the most part, women do not have high enough natural testosterone levels to put on significant mass, right? So that's just not going to happen, right? So we're
Mhm.
not going to bulk up and look huge and swole and jacked because it's not going to happen. There's men who also don't have the body type to be that huge.
Mhm.
And most of the guys who get that huge, they're taking human growth hormone, some kind of anabolic steroid cycle, all that other stuff, right? So naturally, we can only get so big, regardless of where we are. Um, but I think that's the thing that most people are afraid of is to lift the heavy weights.
Mhm.
There's a really cool meta-analysis that just came out that said resistance training is as effective, if not more effective, for fat loss than cardio. And it comes with a slew of other benefits that we just don't get from cardiovascular training. So that was really cool to see. And like with that, like, softer body, that's
Mhm.
also the time to really focus in that traditionally perimenopause and menopause. That's when we're getting older. And that's when the fear of falls
Yes.
increases, the fear of fractures at the hip and the legs. But like the thing, like you said earlier, tugging on bone, right? That literally, when you strength train, when you lift up heavy things and defy gravity, your bone is being pulled on by the muscles, and
Mhm.
that's how we improve bone density. So, I would love to see a shift culturally where like there's a few videos with like 80-year-old women deadlifting like 150 or 200 pounds. That should be the norm,
I
right?
agree.
Like, and we would see body composition change because
Mhm.
we're seeing it right now with these women who choose to engage with strict strength training, right? They're seeing improved body composition. And you don't have to worry about losing your period at that point because
Mhm.
you don't have a period. And I used to joke like, this is when all women should be getting like super strong and jacked
Yeah.
because that is when naturally your testosterone level ratio changes,
Yes.
right? Because, and then you become more anabolic, like I would say a male, right?
Mhm.
So like that's closer to, and that's in the cycle of, women's hormones, like that's when it would look closest to male, right? Is in that menopause world.
I've jokingly said that to my husband that those are my life goals is to look like one of those jacked bodybuilding women when I am
Yeah.
when I've transitioned through menopause because
Yeah.
we don't have as much estrogen competing in our body
Mhm.
at that point. So, as we start going through that perimenopausal transition, our estrogen level naturally starts to decline. And
Mhm.
that's where we get, some of those symptoms like hot flashes, like night sweats,
Mhm.
that are the cultural hallmark because you can
Mhm.
very gently transition through that
Mhm.
period of your life without all of the crazy that we
Mhm.
stereotypically attach to it.
Mhm.
But that transition is where your estrogen is starting to decline. So you don't have that competition against the natural
Mhm.
testosterone in the body as well.
Yeah, and I think about, looking at, kids today who are carrying, like, girls are starting their periods earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
More boys are developing breast tissue, and I think that's some of that is environmental,
Mhm.
as well. And then I think about like, we talking birth control for young people, hormone replacement therapy for older women,
Yeah.
right? Are those things keeping us in a certain state of like, I'm not going to say anabolic, but I'm not going to say catabolic because it's not quite that. But like, you're not, that body composition isn't changing because you're not letting the natural shift happen.
Mhm.
Right. And, I think about, when it comes to nutrition and food, how many of us are exposing ourselves to xenoestrogens or estrogen like byproducts on a daily basis?
Yeah.
And that's just like a whole nother thing that we have to figure out how to navigate because it is a real thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's a lot of phytoestrogens, and people say, oh, soy is not bad, but like we don't eat the soy that traditional Asian cultures eat. We eat a lot of
True.
heavily processed American soy lectin and soy protein,
Mhm.
which the agriculture industry sold to farmers to bulk up cows and pigs faster, but then sold to the health food industry to help people lose weight. So there's this magical thing that can help animals get to market weight faster,
Yeah.
but help humans lose weight faster. It's the coolest substance in the world, I guess. I'm
So
joking. It's not. Yeah.
I talk to people about that too, because, particularly for like my vegetarian clients, they're like, well, but it's a big, source of protein for me. And this could be an entire conversation about meat eaters, meat freers, vegetarianism,
Mhm.
veganism, and how that shows up in the female body. But there are a lot of cultures that that either include animal products or are vegetarian, but they do make space for
Mhm.
certain key animal products in their diets.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so what kinds, since we've already touched on this soy piece of things, what kinds of proteins do you typically recommend to your clients for supporting their strength training journeys?
Yeah, figuring out how to get X amount of protein per like body weight, right?
Mhm.
And that's going to depend on overall body composition, some other stuff, but it's pretty protein heavy. Um, Try to be as food based as possible. Um, I A lot of the people who come to my gym, like we're trying to figure out all the time where to source beef liver from,
Yeah.
and we're talking about like organ grind. So like, can you get the local butcher to add heart, kidney, and liver into your ground beef? So then, like, because we're also trying to feed our kids a level of that like Weston A. Price diet too. So we're unique in that space. But then I do have some people who strive to follow more of like a plant-based diet or plant-forward diet, and some of them struggle. Some people do really well on it,
Mhm.
but some people struggle. I have a gentleman, actually, he, when his family switched to more of a vegetarian heavy diet, he actually gained a lot of weight
Oh, wow.
because in order for him to get the protein requirements he needs, he has to include that much more starch with it.
Yeah.
um, and when we look at some of these, plant-based proteins, they come with a lot of starch,
Mhm.
and um, it's tough to find that. I try to, like, if you have to drink like a whey shake or something like that, that's fine. But like, we shouldn't be drinking our calories if we can help it, unless it's bone broth. That's a good one.
Yeah. Bone broth is an
Um,
excellent one. I talk to
yeah,
my clients a lot about
yeah,
that one.
yeah. Yeah. And so, and then just, we try to, and the only time it gets a little harder to have that conversation is in and around like hemi iron and non-hemi iron.
Mhm.
And like, you can't beat the bang for the buck with something like red meat,
Yeah.
right? Like, and there's just so much hemi iron in there. And some, I've learned just with like our one kiddo going to get iron tests, like the plant-based iron stuff, right? Like it doesn't help with absorption and it
Mhm.
doesn't easily assimilate, right? But like give him like an ounce of liver and his numbers were fantastic.
Yeah.
And it, and like, and that's just hard. And, I want to like try to honor what people are doing, but like you can't, anecdotally for me, I can't beat the results when we include nose to tail eating,
Yeah.
which would have been more traditional. I remember when we first got into like fertility stuff, reading something from Weston A. Price where like some African tribe would not let a couple get married unless the woman consumed like 2 months worth of milk from the grass season to make sure she was like fertile enough. Because they know
Whoa.
once you're married, you're going to try to conceive.
Yeah.
And so, did she have, was her terrain fertile enough to
Yeah.
support human life?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah. So that was their thing. This group of people somewhere in Africa, like women had to consume at least 2 months of milk from the grass season um, before getting married.
That's
So
incredible. Well, I mean,
yeah,
but that just goes to show, though, that they understood
yeah,
that certain things were really important for fertility. Like when I'm talking with my clients about fertility, like I always bring beef liver into the conversation. And there, a lot of people make a lot of faces about it, but there's a reason why we didn't see the fertility challenges that we're seeing today 50
yeah.
years ago, because those were regular parts of people's diets. And then,
Mhm,
somebody didn't prepare it in a way that everybody else liked. And so they were like, no way, I'm feeding my kids this thing, and then they stopped doing it. And it just kind of snowballs over time. So getting people back, like I've seen people who have had a lot of trouble with lupus and things like that.
mhm.
They bring a little bit, or PMDD even, they bring beef
Okay.
liver like 3 ounces once a week into their diet. And it was like a
Mm,
whole new world for them. It was
mm.
amazing.
Yeah, it's and there's so much other stuff happening in the I think it's more about control and levels of colonialism and racism with our food, and what we think is adequate food. And I touched on that a little bit with like people who come here to the US who are told their culturally appropriate food is not healthy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we could just see that in that. So, and traditional food is traditional food. Another thing, I know we were talking energy and stuff like that, that I try to stress for my family and my gym community is, let's just try to eat as seasonally and as local as possible. Like we're here in this terrain, this environment, this ecosystem. If we're eating food outside of that ecosystem, the energy isn't vibrating as close as it
Mm-hmm.
should be for if we consume food here.
Mm-hmm.
And if at the end of the day it's all vibration, we should be eating food from the land we live on, under the sun we share together, and that would optimize health. But yeah, that's
Absolutely.
another one.
No, I completely agree with you, because
Yeah.
from a Chinese medicine perspective, the less time that it travels from its point of origin into your stomach, the higher level of food chi it
Mhm.
contributes to your system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anybody who's consumed locally grown fresh produce knows that it just tastes different and you
Yeah.
feel different with it in your body. And
Mhm.
it's for that reason. So I love that, and I completely agree with you on all of that. So one thing I did want to make sure to touch on
Mhm.
before the end of our time is, if you are not local to Madison,
Yeah.
Wisconsin, how could
Yeah.
somebody be connected with your Move with Your Cycle program?
Yeah. So, utilizing an app called Train Heroic, we've put the 3 month cycle up on there for people to purchase. And it's $100, and you get access to that 3 month program for 1 year. And it also comes with a handy guide that kind of outlines, how to use the app, how to use the program, um, and then what is the menstrual phase hormonally for women, what is going on in follicular, what is going on during ovulation, what is going on during luteal, and to get some of that, like we'll say medical or like informed science on like what is my body doing and why is this the appropriate level of exercise.
Mhm.
And then I include a handful of resources and suggest like different period tracking apps. The new one I think I've seen out there, and I think you have it, like the cycle journal,
Yeah,
um, with like red cover, like that thing looks amazing, right?
yeah, it is. It's
I'm
awesome.
always, yeah, and there's so much good information there, and then it's not an app, because the less we can be around technology, the better. Because again, if we're trying to get in touch with what is natural and cyclical, we can't depend on technology to do that. And also, who's getting that data? That's the other thing we should kind of be mindful of,
Mhm.
who's using period tracking data in a malicious way. But the app, so still get the app, the Train Heroic. Um, and like, you could download it, look at it, and then you have it for a year. And we did a really good job of putting together a lot of high quality coaching videos. There are some equipment needs like sandbags, a bar to hang from because it is the natural movement world. We take everything from the ground to brachiation. So hanging from trees potentially, or playground, monkey bars, stuff like that. And there are progressions for each of the movements. So, there's up to 7 workouts each week. Some of it is walking or hiking, right? So it's not always a purposeful like workout routine. There are at least 3 each week. And so you can download this, follow along with it, and give yourself the 3 months. And then kind of after those 3 months, you can like, okay, what can I do from here on out? I have a good sense. How did this feel? And then also I have 2 other coaches who are in the MovNat world with me, who are available for question and answers as well and guidance, right? So like our information is there. And so as you're going through this program, if you need help, um, you know, with certain moves, certain progressions, we're available to answer that. And it is available on that Train Heroic platform. And I can include a link for all your listeners. And I'm happy to offer like a 20% discount code for your followers
Oh,
if they want
wow.
to try
Thank
that out.
you.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that would be wonderful because I'm a big advocate for people moving in alignment with their cyclical nature. And it was one of the things that totally drew me to your program. I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing I've seen because, I've read some books about, training being a female, but there's really not, like you said at the beginning, there's really not a lot out there that is very focused on the fact that we are cyclical beings and how do we work with that in a meaningful way. So
Mhm.
I love the fact that this resource is out there, and I would love to share it with everybody. So that will be in the show notes. And if people wanted to reach out to you, Rock, how can they get a hold of you?
You can follow us on Instagram at MovNat Madison, or my personal page, rocks.modern.life. Um, but definitely the gym is the best way to get hold of me. And then I can give you an email address as well to put in the show notes if they wanted to email and not, if they're not on social media, to send me a DM. I am definitely trying to be a lot better about answering the DMs. I'm getting more and more of them each day. So, which is nice because it's a way to communicate with you. Like, I think that's how you and I started our conversation, was over Instagram. So,
Absolutely. It's
um,
amazing the cool people you find on Instagram. And I'm so glad we
yeah.
had an opportunity to connect and talk about our shared love of fitness and moving in a cyclical way. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share before we end?
Um, you deserve to be strong. There's a lot of prescription in the fitness world of handing women tiny pink dumbbells and not acknowledging their strength. Women are the strongest people I know. I could not give birth. I know that for a fact. I would be destroyed. There's a reason we have quote unquote man cold and man flu. We're worthless. Um, and I think, be that strong, powerful woman and like pick heavy shit up and find that primal instinct, right? Like grunt, make noise, and just, yeah, like be strong and lift heavy things. Like that would be my closing.
I love that. I love that. And
Yeah.
it really feels good to grunt when you lift heavy things too. I can tell you that from personal experience. So, well, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been an amazing conversation. We may have to do this again, my friend, but everybody
Definitely.
go check out Move with Your Cycle. It is a fantastic program. I hope you all avail yourselves of it, and all of the information about the program and how to get in touch with Rock will be in the show notes. And until next time, move with your cycle.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider making a contribution to the Reproductive Rebel podcast. Your support, in any amount, helps us continue to inspire current and future generations. Show your love for this content in the listener support section below. And thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist, herbalist, sound healer, and Chinese nutritional therapist Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment with Adrienne for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like us and follow Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.